You're pulling into a late-night grocery store parking lot after a long shift, engine ticking as it cools down, just thinking about grabbing something quick and heading home. The lot is almost empty, lights buzzing overhead, everything feels normal, almost too normal. And then a patrol car rolls in slow behind you, and the officer steps out and says, "I smell alcohol." And what you say in the next few seconds is going to determine whether you drive away tonight or end up standing on the side of the road explaining your entire life while your car sits there running in silence. One wrong sentence here doesn't just create suspicion. It can snowball into field sobriety tests, vehicle searches, and a situation you never actually agreed to step into. And here's the thing. A huge number of Americans, over half in fact, do the exact wrong thing in this moment. Not because they're criminals, because nobody ever explained what that phrase actually triggers legally. And stay with me until the end, because even if you handle everything perfectly, there's still a final move officers are trained to use that most people never see coming, and I'll shut that down too. Here's the thing most Americans never figure out. "I smell alcohol" is not a casual observation. This is what's known in law enforcement training as a probable cause escalation trigger. And they practice this exact line because it changes the entire direction of the encounter in seconds. Now listen closely. The officer doesn't need to prove anything yet. He just needs enough to start building a narrative. And the moment you panic, over-explain, or start defending yourself too hard, he's already mapping that behavior into suspicion. He doesn't know if you've been drinking, but he does know something else. Most people will start talking. And the second you start over-talking, he starts collecting pieces. Not proof yet. Pieces. Because the moment you volunteer details like where you were, what you drank, how long ago, even if you think you're helping yourself, you might actually be filling in gaps he needs to justify the next step. And here's where it gets wild. What feels like being cooperative to you can legally be interpreted as behavioral indicators of impairment when written into a report later. That's not opinion. That's how narrative-based policing reports are structured in real DUI investigations. Now stay with me, because this next part is critical. The officer is watching for one thing above everything else in these first moments, whether you know your rights or whether you're going to hand them over without realizing it. Because the second you start trying to talk your way out of it, you've already stepped into a system where your words stop being casual conversation and start becoming evidence fragments. And this is where most people get got. They think they're just explaining. But from the officer's perspective, they're already building a case file in real time. And there's one more layer here most people never think about. Even silence can be written up in a way that sounds suspicious if you don't understand how these reports are framed. So now you're stuck between reacting, staying silent, or trying to be overly polite. And none of those instincts are as safe as they feel in the moment. But what actually works? What do you say when "I smell alcohol" gets dropped on you and everything suddenly shifts? That's where this gets even more important. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the law is on your side. And that officer is counting on you not knowing it. Here's what a large percentage of Americans don't realize. You are not legally required to answer investigative questions designed to build a DUI case against you. You are required to provide basic identification in many states, but you are not required to narrate your condition, your night, your drinking history, or your movements.
And that distinction is everything. Now, let's back this with real legal grounding. The Supreme Court was crystal clear about this in Miranda versus Arizona, 384 U.S. 436, 1966. They ruled that you cannot be compelled to provide testimonial evidence against yourself during custodial interrogation. Now pay attention. People misunderstand this all the time. The protection doesn't only matter after arrest. It defines the entire principle that you do not have to speak in a way that incriminates you. Then we move to Berghaus versus Tompkins, 560 U.S. 370, 2010. The court held that silence alone is not always enough unless you clearly invoke your right. That means your words matter more than people think, and how you assert yourself becomes legally important. Then there's Heibel versus 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada, 542 U.S. 177, 2004. This case clarified that states can require identity in a stop, but it does not give officers unlimited authority to force answers to investigative questions. And here's the ceiling point. Terry versus Ohio, 392 U.S. 1, 1968. This is the foundation of stop and frisk law, and it established that officers need reasonable suspicion, not full proof, to temporarily detain someone. But reasonable suspicion still has to be built, not assumed. And real talk, with ongoing national attention on DUI enforcement campaigns and holiday checkpoint expansions across multiple states, knowing your rights in these moments has never been more important. Now stay with me, because this next part gets even more intense. Here's what most Americans never connect. The officer is not just listening to your answers. He is testing your control under pressure. Because in DUI investigations, behavioral cues are part of the evidence structure. Speech patterns, hesitation, over-explaining, all of it can be written into a report later as indicators. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because once you start answering casually, you've already entered the investigative funnel.
And that funnel only moves one direction, toward more questioning, toward tests, toward deeper evaluation. Let me be straight with you. The officer doesn't need you to confess. He just needs you to keep talking. Because every extra sentence gives him something to interpret, even if you're innocent, especially if you're nervous. And nervousness? That gets written down too. So now you've got a system where silence feels suspicious, talking feels risky, and trying to be polite can actually expand the encounter. And this is where most people freeze up completely. They feel like there's no correct move left, but there is, and it's simpler than you think. But before I show you exactly what to say, you need to understand one more pressure point cops are trained to use when they see you hesitate, and most people never recognize it until it's too late. Here's where it gets really wild, because now you're standing in the most uncomfortable part of the entire interaction. You've been told, "I smell alcohol." You're being watched more closely than you feel comfortable with, and every instinct in your body is trying to fix the situation in real time. But listen, and I mean really listen. Option A, you go silent without clarity. You start acting stiff, avoiding eye contact, shutting down completely. And now the officer writes extreme nervous behavior in his notes, which gets folded into the suspicion narrative. Option B, you get frustrated or defensive. You can't just say that, or "I didn't do anything wrong." And now, suddenly, officer safety protocols kick in, and the entire situation escalates in intensity fast. Option C, you try to over-cooperate. You answer everything, explain everything, try to prove you're fine. And that's exactly how you end up volunteering details that expand the investigation beyond what was originally even necessary. So what in the world are you actually supposed to do here? I'm about to show you. All right, here are the exact words. Write these down if you have to. "I understand your question, officer. I'm choosing to remain silent. I will not answer questions without a lawyer present. I am complying with providing my identification." Let me break this down word by word, because every single phrase is doing legal work here. I understand your question. This removes ambiguity. You are not resisting or ignoring, you are acknowledging. I'm choosing to remain silent. This is a clear invocation of your Fifth Amendment right as recognized under Miranda versus Arizona. It prevents your silence from being twisted into confusion or implied consent. I will not answer questions without a lawyer present. This anchors your position. It signals that further questioning must pause if it becomes custodial or investigatory in nature. I am complying with providing my identification. This separates cooperation from self-incrimination. You are not refusing lawful identification requests, you are refusing interrogation. And when you say this calmly, what you're communicating legally is simple: cooperative behavior. No consent to interrogation. No voluntary self-incrimination. And the officer knows it. That's it. That's the whole thing. Simple, controlled, legally grounded. Now, I already know what you're thinking.
What if the officer pushes back? Scenario A. He says, "Why won't you just answer the question?" You respond calmly, "Officer, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. I will provide identification, but I will not answer questions. Legally, you are reinforcing a protected constitutional right, not resisting. Scenario B. He tries to escalate and says, "Step out of the vehicle." You comply physically because lawful commands must be followed, but you repeat, "I am not answering questions without a lawyer." This keeps compliance separate from interrogation. And here's the part that surprises people. Even when everything is done correctly, officers may still continue the investigation, but your statements are no longer helping build their narrative. They have less to work with. Not zero power, just less leverage. But here's what I didn't cover yet. What happens when that same officer, after all of this, says, "I need you to do some field sobriety tests"? Because that's their next move. And most people fold right there. I made a video breaking down exactly what those tests actually mean and the exact words to use. It's right here. Don't miss it.